In the history of modern music, there are artists born to stand under the spotlight, bathing in the roar of tens of thousands of screaming fans. But then, there are those whose presence is like the air we breathe, invisible, yet absolutely essential for life to exist. Stephen Garrett, known to the world as Static Major, was exactly that kind of existence. If you have ever swayed to the hypnotic, deadly rhythm of Aaliyah's "Are You That Somebody?" or if you've ever recited the infectious rap verse in Lil Wayne's "Lollipop," word for word, then you have heard the soul of Static. He wasn't just a songwriter. He was the architect of hits, the secret weapon that defined the R&B sound of an entire decade. They called him the penless writer, a peculiar genius who could step into a vocal booth and let melodies flow from his mind directly into the microphone without ever writing down a single line of text. But behind those platinum plaques and prestigious Grammy awards lay a haunting ghost. Here was a man who possessed the talent of a god, but carried the heart of a deeply fearful human being. He feared the limelight, and tragically, he feared hospitals more than death itself. The story begins in Louisville, Kentucky, in November 1974. Stephen Garrett was born into a family where music flowed through their veins, thicker than blood. His father was a musician. His mother was the choir director at their church. By the tender age of 3, little Stephen was already standing in the middle of the sanctuary, belting out a voice so clear and powerful that it silenced even the most devout congregants. It wasn't just singing. It was destiny. However, as he entered his teenage years, Stephen lived a life full of contradictions. In school and on the streets of Louisville, he built a shell around himself, a cool guy persona, a ladies' man, a jokester. In the harsh world of the hood, artistic vulnerability could sometimes be a fatal weakness. So, Stephen hid his singing ability. His friends only knew him for his freestyle raps and the beats he pounded out on his school desk. Only when night fell, or during secret rehearsals with his gospel group, was his true self allowed to surface. But darkness descended upon Stephen's life very early, planting a seed of terror in his heart that would haunt him until his final breath. When Stephen was 16 years old, tragedy struck right inside his home. His beloved older sister passed away from heart failure at the age of just 22. She needed a heart and lung transplant, but the miracle never came. His sister's death was a devastating blow to the young man's fragile soul. Stephen refused to accept it as fate. In his overwhelming grief, he placed all the blame on the people in white coats. To Stephen, a hospital was not a place of healing. It was a cold slaughterhouse, a place that stole the lives of those he loved most. At her funeral, when Stephen sang, "It's so hard to say goodbye to yesterday," his voice held not just the pain of loss, but a silent, simmering resentment. Hospitals kill people. That thought took root deep in his subconscious, becoming an invisible curse that would cling to him for the rest of his life. The loss sent Stephen spiraling. He acted out, neglected his studies, and was eventually sent to the Burger King Academy, a program for troubled kids who possessed artistic potential. It seemed as though his future had closed behind the gates of an alternative school. But it was in this dark place that Stephen's talent shone the brightest. During a school ceremony when Stephen was asked to sing the national anthem, the entire auditorium held its breath. His voice soared, shattering every preconceived notion about a troubled kid. That performance was so stellar that it earned him a full scholarship to the University of Louisville at only 17 years old. The doors to the future swung open once again. It was during this time that he chose his name. He wanted to bring static, a shock to the system, to the music industry, and he added major to assert his dominance. He was ready to take on the world. But he had no idea that his path to glory would lead him straight into the dungeon of a musical madman, a place that would forge him into a legend, but almost break his spirit in the process. Here is part 2 of the script. Target length 650 words. Content: the journey into Devante Swing's basement, the harsh reality of the music industry, and the birth of the hit song Pony. Script: The Silent Architect, Part 2. Part 2. Surviving the Basement. By 1991, Stephen, now fully embodying the persona of Static Major, had graduated high school. Alongside his friends Smoke and Black, he formed a group called A Touch of Class. They were young, hungry, and waiting for a miracle. That miracle arrived in the form of Devante Swing, the mastermind behind the R&B supergroup Jodeci. When Jodeci passed through Louisville on tour Static, and his crew managed to hustle their way backstage, they sang for Devante right there on the spot, an a cappella audition in a chaotic hallway. Devante was impressed. He looked them in the eye and promised to sign them once his tour was over. It sounded like the classic Hollywood dream. But after the handshake, the phone didn't ring. The group drifted apart. It wasn't until Smoke ran into Static on the University of Louisville campus months later that the dream was resurrected. Devante had finally called, but he was looking to fill spots in other groups like H-Town or Intro. Smoke refused to leave his brother behind. He told the R&B mogul, "You have to hear my new member." He put Static on the line, or perhaps they auditioned again, but the result was undeniable. Devante realized he had struck gold. He signed them all, renamed the group Playa, and summoned them to the East Coast. They thought they were moving to paradise. They were moving to hell. The omen appeared immediately. When the group arrived at Devante's mansion in New Jersey, they found the house in chaos. Just hours before their arrival, Devante had been the victim of a brutal home invasion. Robbers had tied him up, pistol-whipped him, and stolen $20,000 in cash and jewelry. The urban legend goes that Devante had to bite one of the robbers' fingers off just to escape. Walking into that house, Static and his friends weren't walking into a record label. They were walking into a war zone. Soon after, Devante moved the entire operation to Rochester, New York, establishing what would become known as the Basement. Looking back, it sounds like a fantasy. Living under one roof were Missy Elliott, Timbaland, Ginuwine, Tweet, Stevie J, and Static Major. It was the greatest concentration of R&B talent ever assembled in one building. But this wasn't a summer camp. It was a boot camp. Devante was a tyrant. He enforced a strict cult-like isolation. There was no radio, no TV, and absolutely no listening to outside music. He wanted their sound to be pure, uncontaminated by current trends. They were locked in day and night, forced to create using only their own minds, and the futuristic, jagged beats that Timbaland was beginning to craft. In this pressure cooker, Static thrived. Devante himself admitted in later interviews that out of all the stars in that house, Static was the most talented. He was a double threat. He could sing with the soul of a church boy and rap with the grit of a street hustler. He became the go-to writer, the glue holding the creative process together. But creativity couldn't mask the abuse. The basement crew was starving, literally. Timbaland later wrote in his memoirs that despite working on platinum albums for Jodeci, they often had no food to eat and no soap to wash with. They were generating millions of dollars in value, yet they were living like paupers. Devante was known to be physically abusive, slapping his artists and producers, treating these future legends like indentured servants. They were a school of Motown-level talent, trapped in a nightmare. By 1996, the dam broke. The artists realized they were being exploited. Missy Elliott left. Timbaland left. The empire began to crumble. But Static and Playa stayed the longest, perhaps out of loyalty, or perhaps out of fear. It was during these twilight years of the swing mob era that the ultimate betrayal occurred. Static had written a song. A strange, jerky, infectious track built around a vocal sample that sounded like a burp. It was called Pony. He wrote it Timbaland, produced it, and they recorded it with Ginuwine. It was a masterpiece. But Devante Swing hated it, or perhaps he just wanted to control it. He sat on the record, refusing to release it for 2 whole years. When Ginuwine finally escaped Devante's clutches and signed a solo deal with Sony, he took Pony with him. The song exploded. It hit #1 on the Billboard R&B charts, went platinum, and turned Ginuwine into a global sex symbol. Static watched from the sidelines. He had written the song that defined the year, yet the world was chanting Ginuwine's name. It was a bitter lesson in the music industry. Talent is nothing without ownership. Static Major and Playa finally packed their bags. They were the last to leave the sinking ship of Devante Swing. They walked away with empty pockets, but they carried something far more valuable, a hard-earned education in the dark arts of the music business, and a phone book that included the number of a young girl named Aaliyah. When Static Major and Playa left the abusive clutches of Devante Swing, they didn't fall into obscurity. Instead, they walked straight into the offices of Blackground Records. The label was run by Barry Hankerson, but its heart and soul was his niece, the R&B princess herself, Aaliyah. This meeting wasn't just a business transaction. It was a collision of destinies. By the late 90s, Aaliyah was already a superstar, but she was looking for a sound that could mature with her. She found that sound in Stephen Garrett. If Timbaland provided the skeleton of the music, the jerky, futuristic beats, then Static provided the flesh and blood. He brought the melody, the swag, and the lyrics that felt like whispers in the dark. The legend of their partnership was cemented with one specific song. The year was 1998. Blackground Records needed a lead single for the Dr. Dolittle movie soundtrack. They were in a panic. The deadline was 24 hours away. Missy Elliott, the usual songwriter, was unavailable. In a desperate move, the executives called Static. He showed up to the studio with nothing but his instincts. He listened to the beat, a strange, crying baby sample looped over a frenetic rhythm. Most songwriters would have been confused. Static just closed his eyes. In less than 3 hours, without writing a single word on paper, he composed, "Are You That Somebody?" When Aaliyah stepped into the booth, she didn't just sing the lyrics, she inhabited them. The chemistry was palpable. The line, "Dirty South, can y'all really feel me?" wasn't just a throwaway lyric. It was a code. For years, rumors swirled around the industry. Were they just collaborators? Or was there something more? Static's mother later confirmed the truth in an interview. They were definitely an item. Aaliyah was crazy about him. Static even brought the superstar to his brother's wedding, a rare public appearance for the notoriously private singer. They had to keep it secret, hiding their love from her controlling uncle and the prying eyes of the media. But if you listen closely to the music they made together, you can hear the intimacy. It wasn't just business. It was love captured on tape. This was the golden era. Static became the ghost in the machine for the entire industry. He wrote "So Anxious" for Ginuwine, turning his former groupmate's career around yet again. He wrote for Destiny's Child. He wrote for Jay-Z. But his heart always belonged to Aaliyah's projects. Together, they created a winning streak that remains untouched. He penned "Try Again" for the Romeo Must Die soundtrack, which became the first song in history to reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, based solely on airplay. He was unstoppable. In 2001, Aaliyah began working on her self-titled third album, The Red Album. This was intended to be her magnum opus, her crossover into adult superstardom. Static was the primary architect of this project. He spent months in Australia with her, while she hummed Queen of the Damned writing songs in trailers and hotel rooms. He wrote We Need a Resolution More Than a Woman and the sensual Rock the Boat. The album was released in July 2001 to critical acclaim. It felt like the beginning of a long reign. Static Major had finally found his perfect vessel, and Aaliyah had found her perfect voice. They were young, rich, and on top of the world. Then came August 25, 2001. Aaliyah traveled to the Bahamas to shoot the music video for Rock the Boat, a song Static had written. Usually Static would be right there on set with her. He was her shadow, her partner in crime. But this time, for some reason, he didn't go. He stayed behind. When the news broke that the twin-engine Cessna carrying Aaliyah and her team had crashed shortly after takeoff, killing everyone on board, Static thought it was a sick joke. He called her family, expecting them to deny it. Instead, he heard weeping. The devastation was absolute. Static didn't just lose a client. He lost his muse, his secret love, and his best friend. The survivor's guilt was crushing. Why wasn't he on that plane? Or if he had been there, could he have changed the outcome? For a long time after the crash, Static couldn't turn on the radio. Every time he heard Rock the Boat or More Than a Woman, it wasn't a celebration of his success. It was a reminder of a ghost. The music industry kept moving. The charts kept turning. But for Static Major, the music had died. He retreated into himself, a wounded animal, hiding from the light. The golden era was over, and the silence that followed was deafening. After the funeral of Aaliyah, a part of Static Major died, but the machine had to keep running. He was too talented to quit. Yet something fundamental in him shifted. While he continued to lend his golden pen to artists like Truth, Hurt's addictive. Pretty Ricky on the hotline and David Banner rang it up, he withdrew further from the celebrity lifestyle that most people in his position would have embraced. Static was an anomaly in the music business. He was a man who had written #1 hits for the biggest stars on the planet yet. If you looked for him at the VIP section of the club, you wouldn't find him. He wasn't popping bottles with models. He wasn't chasing paparazzi. Static was at home. He was a family man in the truest sense of the word. After meeting and marrying his wife, Avanti, his world revolved around her and their children. He even adopted and raised his late sister's daughter, the child of the sister whose death had traumatized him years earlier. To Static, family was the only thing that was real. The industry was just smoke and mirrors. He preferred watching old kung fu movies, cheering at his kids' football games, or just hanging out in his old neighborhood in Louisville, letting his childhood friends drive his luxury cars. He remained grounded, a regular guy who just happened to be a musical genius. However, the itch to step out from the shadows never truly went away. For years, he had been the man behind the curtain. Now, he was ready to take center stage. He began working on his debut solo album titled Supper Time. The industry was buzzing. Major labels were fighting over him. Atlantic Records wanted him, 50 Cent's G-Unit wanted him. But in a move that displayed his intense, almost tragic loyalty, Static decided to sign with Blackground Records, the same label that had given him his first check, the same label that had housed Aaliyah. He wanted to bring it home. The album was shaping up to be a masterpiece with production from heavyweights like Dr. Dre, Scott Storch, and Pharrell. But destiny had one last massive detour for him. In early 2008, word reached Static that Lil Wayne was looking for him. At that moment, Wayne was the self-proclaimed best rapper alive, and he was putting the finishing touches on the Carter 3. The album was gritty, lyrical, and hard, but Wayne knew he was missing something. He needed a bridge to the pop world. He needed a radio smash. He needed Static Major. When they got together, Static didn't just write a hook. He gifted Wayne a rocket ship. The song was Lollipop. The truth is, Lollipop was essentially Static's song. He had the melody, the cadence, and that infectious auto-tuned hook already tapped out in his head before he even played it for Wayne. When Lil Wayne heard it, he knew it was the missing piece. The song was released, and it caused a seismic shift. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural phenomenon. It shot straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, selling over 9 million copies. It became the most successful single of both Lil Wayne's and Static Major's careers. It was the song that would eventually push the Carter III to sell 1 million copies in its first week and win a Grammy for Best Rap Song. Static was finally getting his flowers, while he could still smell them. Or so it seemed. He was in high demand again. His name was on everyone's lips. He was 33 years old, rich, respected, and on the verge of releasing his own solo album. The dark days of the basement and the grief over Aaliyah seemed to be in the rearview mirror. But as he posed for photos on the set of the Lollipop music video in Las Vegas, flashing signs and looking like the superstar he was born to be, no one knew that his body was already beginning to fail him. He was fighting a cold that wouldn't go away. He was feeling dizzy. The fear of hospitals that had been dormant for years was about to wake up. The final countdown had begun. In the world of entertainment, there are coincidences, and then there are patterns so chilling they feel like a curse. Numerologists and fans alike have long whispered about the curse of the 25th. Michael Jackson took his last breath on June 25th. James Brown left us on December 25th. Lisa Left Eye Lopes died on April 25th. Roger Troutman, another talkbox legend, died on April 25th. And of course, Aaliyah Static's musical soulmate perished on August 25th. Whether it was fate or just a cruel roll of the dice, Stephen Garrett was about to join this tragic fraternity. The sequence of events that led to his death began in the glitzy artificial lights of Las Vegas. Static was there to shoot the music video for Lollipop with Lil Wayne. In the footage, he looks cool, collected, and vibrant. But off camera, his body was waging a war. He had been battling a nasty cold for a week, dragging himself through the long shoot days with pure willpower. When the director yelled "cut" for the final time, Static just wanted to go home. He was exhausted. But his loyalty, that fatal flaw, pulled him in another direction. He was scheduled to fly to Atlanta to work with Lil Eazy-E, a label mate, on Blackground Records. Even though he felt dizzy and weak, he got on the plane. He didn't want to let anyone down. Once he arrived in Atlanta, his condition deteriorated rapidly. It wasn't just a cold anymore. He was in his hotel room when the terrifying symptoms began. He tried to drink water, but he couldn't swallow. The liquid regurgitated through his nose. His voice, his instrument, his livelihood began to slur and fade into a whisper. His eyelids drooped heavily, as if gravity had suddenly increased tenfold. Panic set in. He called his wife Avanti and his mother. "I can't swallow," he told them, his voice trembling with fear. "Something is wrong." They begged him to go to the hospital. For Static, this was the ultimate nightmare scenario. This was the man who believed hospitals were death traps, the man who blamed doctors for his sister's death. But the physical terror of suffocating outweighed his psychological phobia. He checked himself into Baptist Hospital East. When his wife arrived from Louisville to pick him up days later, She was shocked by what she saw. The vibrant, energetic man she loved was in a wheelchair, his eyes almost completely shut. They initially thought he might have had a stroke, but after a battery of tests, the doctors came back with a different name: myasthenia gravis. It is a rare chronic autoimmune disease where the communication between nerves and muscles breaks down. It causes severe weakness in the skeletal muscles, the ones responsible for breathing and moving. It was serious, but it was treatable. The doctors recommended a procedure called plasmapheresis. It sounds complex, but it's similar to dialysis. They would insert a catheter into his neck, filter the antibodies out of his blood, and cycle it back into his body. The procedure was scheduled for the next day, but for some reason that remains frustratingly unclear. The doctor in charge was in a rush. He wanted to do it now. He wanted to do it that very same day. Static was terrified. He felt a deep primal dread settling in his chest. He looked at the doctors, then at his wife, and made one request. "I want to see my kids." He refused to let them touch him until he saw his children. Avanti rushed home and brought their children to the hospital room. What happened next is a scene that breaks the heart. Static, usually the pillar of strength, broke down in tears. His 4-year-old daughter, confused by her father's weeping, asked, "Daddy, why are you crying?" He tried to compose himself, wiping away the tears. "Everything is going to be all right," he lied. He looked at Avanti with an intensity she had never seen before. It was a look of profound, silent knowing, as if he knew he wasn't coming back out of that procedure room. He was saying goodbye without saying the words. The nurse ushered the family out. Static's mother insisted on staying by his side, but his wife and children were sent away. As Avanti walked down the hospital corridor, a strange feeling washed over her, a compulsion to turn back. She went back into the room for one last look. Static was lying there staring at her. A single tear rolled down his cheek. It was the last time she would ever see him alive. The door to the procedure room closed, shutting out the world. Inside, the nightmare that Static Major had feared since he was 16 years old was about to become a reality. The procedure, officially known as a central line placement for plasmapheresis, is a serious medical intervention. But in modern medicine, it is considered routine if followed by protocol. The standard of care dictates that a doctor should use an ultrasound machine to guide the needle. It allows them to see the veins and arteries, ensuring they don't puncture anything vital. It is a map for the surgeon's hands. But on this day, the doctor in charge made a decision that would cost a man his life. He decided to go in blind. He did not use an ultrasound. He did not use a scope. He relied on anatomical landmarks, essentially guessing the location of the vein by feeling the neck. In a rushed, careless motion, he inserted the large-bore catheter needle into the side of Static's neck. He missed the target. Instead of sliding safely into the vein to filter the blood, the needle tore through the vertebral artery and punctured the lung cavity. It was a catastrophic error. But the doctor, seemingly unaware or unbothered by the resistance, secured the line, and then, shockingly, he left the room. He left the hospital. He went home, leaving his patient in the hands of a nurse. Inside the room, the effects were immediate. Static, who had been relatively pain-free, aside from his weakness, began to writhe in agony. He turned to the nurse, his voice barely a whisper, and asked a question that haunts the memory. "Is it supposed to hurt like this?" He told her he could feel something wrong inside his chest. He said, "Something is wrong with my organs." His intuition, that survival instinct that had guided him through the dangerous streets of the music industry, was screaming at him. He knew he was dying. The nurse, seeing his distress, tried to make him comfortable by turning him from side to side. But the pain only intensified. panic rising, she picked up the phone and called the doctor who had just left. She described the agony Static was in. The doctor's order over the phone was simple, swift, and fatal. Pull the catheter out. He didn't return to check the placement. He didn't order a scan. He just told her to remove it. When the nurse reached for that line in Static's neck, she unknowingly held the trigger of a loaded gun. Because the artery had been punctured, the catheter was the only thing acting as a plug holding back a torrent of blood. She pulled it out. The moment the line left his neck, the pressure in his chest collapsed. It was over in seconds. Static Major passed out immediately. He would never regain consciousness. The scene that followed was one of pure chaos and horror. Every time Static's body tried to take a breath, blood was sucked into his lungs and chest cavity. He was essentially drowning internally. The nurse, realizing too late the magnitude of what had happened, began to panic. Outside in the hallway, Static's mother heard the commotion. She ran screaming for help, begging other doctors to come and save her son. She called Devante, who was on her way home, screaming into the phone, "He passed out. He won't wake up." Devante spun the car around and raced back to the hospital. When she burst into the room, she saw a team of doctors working on her husband. They were performing CPR, pushing on his chest, trying to shock his heart back into rhythm. And then she heard it. Loud, guttural grunts coming from Static's body. His body was jumping and jerking on the table. To a loving wife, desperate for hope, it looked like a fight. She thought he was battling to come back to her. She stood there, cheering him on through her tears. "Fight, baby. Keep fighting, me need you." She didn't know the truth. The doctors in that room knew. They knew he was already gone. Those sounds, those haunting grunts, were not the sounds of a man fighting for life. They were agonal respirations, the involuntary spasms of a body that had already died. The doctors continued the resuscitation efforts for nearly an hour and a half, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps to cover their tracks, or perhaps just to give the family a moment to process the impossible. But the music had stopped. The man who gave Aaliyah her sound, the man who gave Lil Wayne his biggest hit, the father, the husband, the genius was dead. He was 33 years old. He died on February 25th, 2008. Killed not by the disease he had, but by the very place he had feared all his life. In the deafening silence that followed the chaos, the doctors stood around Static's lifeless body. When Devante, broken and trembling, asked them what happened, how a man who walked in with a sore throat ended up dead, they had no answers. Or rather, they refused to give them. They didn't look her in the eye. They mumbled about complications and natural causes. Whispers began to circulate immediately. The blogs speculated about a brain aneurysm or even a drug overdose. The hospital, in a move of cold self-preservation, told the family that Static had died from his medical condition and that there was no need for an autopsy. They wanted to wrap it up, sign the certificate, and close the book. But Devante didn't buy it. She knew her husband. She remembered the look in his eyes. She remembered the pain he complained about. Driven by a widow's intuition, she hired a private doctor to perform an independent autopsy. The results were damning. The report didn't say aneurysm. It didn't say overdose. It read death due to respiratory arrest after the removal of the catheter. The medical examiner noted that a large caliber catheter had punctured the apex of his lung and his subclavian artery. When the nurse pulled it out, he bled to death internally. Armed with the truth, the family filed a malpractice lawsuit against Baptist Hospital East and the doctor in charge. In court, the doctor tried to shift the blame. He argued that if the nurse had told him about Static's complaints of pain, he would have returned to remove the device himself properly. He claimed he wouldn't have left the building if he had known. It was a finger-pointing game played over the grave of a genius. The lawsuit was eventually settled, but as Devante stated, no amount of money was enough to correct the fact that her husband is gone. On the day of his funeral, Louisville came to a standstill. Static Major was laid to rest in a solid gold casket, a final flashy statement for a man who spent his life avoiding the spotlight. But amidst the gold and the flowers, the tragedy was palpable. Static's mother stood by the grave, a woman who had now watched both of her children die in hospitals, victims of the very system that was supposed to save them. The fear that Static had carried since he was 16 had come full circle. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy written in blood. Yet you cannot kill a melody. Static Major is gone, but his fingerprint is on every radio station today. His influence didn't die in that hospital room. Years later, when Drake dropped his hit song, "Look What You've Done," he paid direct homage to Static. Chris Brown sampled him. Bryson Tiller, a fellow Louisville native, received the Static Major Award and credits him as the blueprint for his entire career. Even today, Devante manages his estate, sitting on a vault of reportedly over 1,200 unreleased songs. He left behind enough music to last another lifetime. Stephen Garrett died on February 25, 2008. He was only 33 years old. He had conquered the charts, he had defined a genre, and he was just getting ready to show the world who he really was. He was the man who gave Aaliyah her cool, gave Ginuwine his swagger, and gave Lil Wayne his biggest pop hit. He was the best-kept secret in the music industry. But secrets this big don't stay buried forever. Every time you hear that distinctive syncopated rhythm of 90s R&B, or the smooth auto-tuned crooning of modern hip-hop, you are hearing the ghost of Static Major. Rest in peace, Static. The music never stopped.